All right, thank you everyone for to the August Data Governing Board meeting for P20 Win. We're going to get started, and Katie's out, so I'm going to do all of the things that she usually does. And please let me know if I missed something in the process. We'll open briefly for any public comment. I do not see evidence there's going to be any public comment, but if there's anyone from the public who wants to weigh in on anything, now is your opportunity to do so. And hearing nothing, then we'll go through the roll call and attendance. I am pleased to note that this is now the first meeting where everybody has actually signed the new Enterprise Memorandum of Understanding. So we have all of the agencies have signed it. We have to compile all the signatures into a single document, but we reached that point earlier this week, which is wonderful. And so now we have this wonderful group of people who are all full partners in P20 Win and members of the Data Governing Board. So I'll go through the just sort of roll call of the designated members, and if there's any anyone else that's missing, just let me know. So Ram from Office of Higher Ed, I believe, is out today. I don't see anyone else from Office of Higher Ed in the list. Robert Barry, we will introduce a little bit later. Is from DAS Best, is the newest member for the Data Governing Board. You're here. Linda from Coalition to End Homelessness.
Here.
Patrick Flaherty from Department of Labor.
Here.
Ajit Kapalakrishnan from State Department of Education.
Present.
Lauren Jurgensen from University of Connecticut.
Here.
Jan Keeney from State Colleges and Universities.
Here.
Rachel Leventhal-Weiner from the Office of Early Childhood.
Present.
Trina Mazzata from Department of Children and Families. If Trina's not on. Anyone else from DCF that's on the call? Don't see. Oh, there's Trina. Okay. Hey, Trina, we're just doing the roll call. You are here.
Oh, good morning. Yep. Sorry, I'm late.
Nope, you're fine. Susan Smith from Department of Social Services.
Present.
And Jen Witness from the Conference of Independent Colleges.
Here.
Great. So it's wonderful, an almost full slate of participants today, and I will get started. So this is the, again, August meeting for Data Governing Board. We'll go through, we did public comment, attendance. We had a few updates, and then what we're hoping to discuss for the remainder is go through research agenda updates a little bit, quick updates on data sharing agreements, and then next steps on the technical upgrade recommendations. And then, any other topics members kind of see fit to discuss. I will go through. This is the same kind of annual calendar that we usually present in the meetings. I don't know of any updates to it that kind of fully made it onto the calendar since the last meeting. But if there are changes either in the timing or new requests that you anticipate coming in, please let me know. I will say we had a couple sort of very early requests come in this week. They're not sure whether they're actually going to make it through, but we are seeing kind of a number of requests start early in the pipeline. We don't have timing or enough details to really put them on the calendar yet, but we're starting to get a few inquiries in, which I think is good news and reflects the value that this kind of work has for people. Is there anything folks know, either requests that are coming in or adjustments that you might want to make to the calendar here, just so we can keep sort of roughly on track with the timeline for the different requests?
Scott, you emailed me yesterday, and I just want to flag around the transfer guarantee. So for folks that aren't familiar, I actually have an article I can share, hopefully after this call. But CCIC has been working with the New England Board of Higher Ed and CSCU around streamlining transfer from community colleges into the independent colleges. And so NEBI is going to use P20 Win to do some data analysis on sort of how that's going. And I think Maura indicated that we will start probably collecting data from our institutions in October, Scott. So I don't know, Maura, when do you think we should put it on the timeline here for potential matching? Like maybe like November or December, probably?
Yeah, I think November might be a little optimistic. Probably December makes more sense.
Right. I'm thinking, yeah, I probably will be January, but let's put it on the calendar, Scott, for maybe anticipated December.
Jen, quick question. This is
Yeah,
Jan. Just for clarity, this is the timeline for an agreement, or like, is there an agreement?
There's not an agreement yet, and so Maura will have to start working on that with Katie and Scott and you. But you know, you guys are active partners or colleagues, so it shouldn't. I don't think it'll be a heavy lift, Jan. But we just need to get the ball rolling on it. Like,
Well, wait. I know there were some calls where I felt like we were sort of carved out of that, but maybe that's not. Maybe that's changed. So I'll wait for whatever comes through. Thanks.
Maura.
Scott, I think you are aware that United Way, we're going to be working with them. We're actually just got they want some input from us on the data sharing agreement. So that's going to be coming your way, as well as the one that we've been talking about that we would like from DOL. So en route.
Excellent. And can I ask for either of these, is there like a deadline for so for CCH, you're looking to match with the employment and wage records from Department of Labor, and for the transfer guarantee project, is there sort of a final deadline by which you need the end result for either?
No.
Head shaking from Jen. Okay.
No,
not.
Sorry, Linda. No, we're flexible, I think. I mean, there's a grant here, Scott, for our program that Emily, like the NIBI folks, might have a timeline. But maybe, you know, maybe Katie, and when she gets back from vacation or after Labor Day, could just set up a meeting to start fleshing out the data request. Just so, like I hear Jan saying like it will take time to get that done. So we'll start working on that in September.
And we don't have a hard deadline either for our projects.
Scott, can I just ask on the post-secondary outcomes request? I've heard that mentioned by OWS. If I think that's what that is. Is that OWS?
This is not from OWS, although I think they would be users of it. This is the joint request from CSU, UConn, and Department of Labor that I think of as,
Okay.
and Patrick or Jan, you can correct me, I think of as kind of a continuation of the past request for the legislative report card. You know, the fields and the metrics have been modified somewhat, but
I've heard
the
Kelly.
spirit of.
Okay, well, so separate than that, I've heard OWS mention a data request that's been mandated. So at some point, it might be helpful to have a sense of what they're going to be looking for. If you know.
There is may language in the legislation that says that OWS, Department of Labor, and myself may submit a data request by January of next year, which I think would be similar in intent. And I don't think any work has begun on that, to my knowledge.
Thank you.
I can ask. If there's other updates for the calendar, let me know. We did have, I think, a series of good meetings where we made progress on the request from Yale for analysis of pre-K outcomes for New Haven Public Schools. So we were very close to having a final agreement to circulate for that complicated request. And I think those were the main things that I knew from the calendar that I wanted to cover. I know I wanted to switch to the research agenda as soon as we can get to, because I know Susan has to drop off in a few minutes. Anything else for the calendar we'll add, just so we can stay on top of it? So we'll follow up in the NEBI request, and Linda, it sounds like you're sending something on the match for CCH. Two other just very quick updates. and we'll go through these kind of as quickly as possible. As I think folks know, but just, not everybody's in the meeting necessarily. We had the executive board meeting last week. I covered new requests that are coming in, so I think there's some additional discussion about potential future requests. We reviewed the changes to legislation, discussed system sustainability, the technical upgrade recommendations. Kelly Valerie's, the Chief Workforce Officer, was added through the legislative changes to the executive board, and the board voted to add a DAS best representative, which is Bob, to the data governing board, and so we'll go through that change a little later. It was broadcast on CTN. If you missed it and you wish to relive the experience, the link is here. The other one I wanted to just cover real quickly is the SLDS conference. So every year, Federal Department of Education has a conference for all of the state longitudinal data systems around the country. We are, I believe, required, or at least strongly encouraged, to submit a proposal by next Friday, which is September 3rd. And so this, perhaps in the next discussion on the research agenda will be a good time to kind of brainstorm about some ideas, but it's a good time to think of something where there's work that you've done, work that you may be doing in the future that you want to highlight at this event. Last year, we submitted 3 proposals and got 3 presentations on the State Department of Education's early indication tool, on the data sharing playbook that had been worked on closely with Office of Early Childhood and OPM, and then with Department of Labor on workforce training outcomes. And then Katie and I did a side presentation on sort of the onboarding process. So I think we're successful in getting presentations into the agenda, but if folks have ideas, we'll circulate the link to a survey, which you're welcome to fill out before next Friday. And if you have ideas for the conference, it's a good opportunity to share work, learn from others. You can propose presentations, panels, topic discussions. There's a variety of different ways to pursue it. It doesn't have to be necessarily you presenting on something. Anything folks wanted to flag either for the executive board or the SLDS conference before I move forward on the agenda?
I mean, I was at the executive board meeting. I thought it went really well. Commissioner Bai is an enthusiastic chair, which is really nice to see and to have. And to just flag for those that weren't there, I'd say the biggest area of discussion was the technical upgrades memo. I think legislative changes had some comments as well, but nothing too substantive. But Provost Jane Gates from CSU just made a comment that she was pleased to see that the technical upgrade recommendations were just that, like recommendations. And, we had there was just a little commentary from CSU and CCIC and UConn about the potential shift to a more centralized repository and like what that impact could be and mean for higher ed in particular. But overall, I think the board was a great meeting and folks were pleased to be there, and Scott and Katie did a great job.
Thank you, Jen. Yeah, I think it was very encouraging to see participation from the board members and kind of active engagement. So thank you for everybody that.
Yeah, sorry. And also I just say folks did a great job of preparing their commissioners. So I felt like, even the new folks were, admittedly still new, but obviously had been well prepared for the meeting. So thanks for everyone on the call who participated in that.
All right, I'm going to move to the research agenda and apologize for shortening some of the other parts of this. So one thing we're thinking of for the November executive board meeting was looking at any updates or revisions to the research agenda. It's been about a year since there was kind of any board discussion of the research agenda. So it's a good way, I think, to have kind of a regularly scheduled meeting where the executive board looks at the research agenda, makes sure that it lines up with the priorities that they have as agencies, policy priorities for the state, changing issues. I think that's critical to ensuring that the work that we're all doing is used and is relevant, to the decision-making and work that the agencies are doing. So we wanted to have time in November to go through research agenda, calibrate and adjust it kind of as necessary. And so in advance of that, to have a brief discussion today, or as long a discussion as you want, I guess, to start thinking about that. And then particularly a good base for that would be where some of the agencies have their own research agenda already either in place or underway. And since I know Susan has to leave in about 3 minutes, I was going to see if we could put Susan on the spot to talk about this, because I know it's something that Department of Social Services has been taking a close look at, and the extent to which any agency has their own sort of research priorities outlined. It's something that I think would be a wonderful way of informing this kind of collective research agenda. So I pulled the research agenda on the screen here. And Susan, I don't know if you, in the brief time we still got you, if you want to cover kind of how you're thinking about this at DSS, and then hopefully that'll lead into a little more discussion with the other members.
Thanks, Scott. So yeah, I do have to leave in a couple of minutes, so I'm probably going to talk faster than I normally do. But for us, we're really kind of thinking about this as a way to support our goals related to greater data transparency, data democratization, and access to actionable data. So we've really been kind of kicking over within the last year, establishing a research agenda, really trying to think about, again, how we really have much more actionable intelligence, and creating a structure whereby not only internally but also kind of external to us, that some of our institutional partners are able to help us to answer questions about the functioning and success of our programs. One of the things that in the years since I've been at DSS is just seeing the number of data requests that come in, and how complicated those are. And it really seems that a research agenda would also be another way of helping to kind of organize some of the data request process for us. There's some regulation and statutory language that really does kind of limit how our data can be used and how we can share it. So we're sometimes kind of tying ourselves in knots in order to kind of find ways to kind of support the request, because it does really have to kind of promote our oversight and administration and monitoring of our programs for certain data types and certain program types. And so sometimes that can be a challenge. And it really just kind of dawned on us that, if we really could start to lay out, here are the kinds of questions that we have. These are the kinds of things that we're trying to get underneath, and we're going to, potentially look to prioritize your access to those data. I know everyone, can relate to this, that it's really quite, resource demanding to service a data request. I'm involved with one that literally a month's worth of records is like 900,000 records. So a year's worth of data is like 10 million records. And so when someone's saying, "Oh, I want 7 years worth of data," that's a lot of a resource that has to go into pulling all those records, often from various systems, and connecting the dots on those. And so, we obviously also want to ensure that, when we're engaging in those, that hopefully certain questions that we have are also being answered. So we're really kind of looking at a research agenda and as really being a multitasker. So, a way of, as I stated, to kind of answer our questions, but also to invite some of our external partners to kind of leverage some of their expertise and knowledge to really help us to kind of answer questions, answer them well, with a different level of sophistication than sometimes we can do ourselves. So I know that's very quick, but that's kind of where we are and what our thinking is.
Susan, did you want to give a preview of any topics or areas that might be in focus, to the extent that you can?
Yeah, I mean, this is still very evolving, but some areas that are kind of surfacing have to do with health equity. So we're really kind of thinking about, some questions that we have there. We've been working with our ASOs, and they've been presenting data, and we're starting to kind of see certain things there that we're thinking about exploring and trying to better understand those, and maybe thinking about whether or not that's an opportunity to also link data with other state agencies about some of the folks that we're serving who are what are called unattributed, who may not have a primary physician, and trying to better understand how we can support those particular consumers and clients. Just also thinking about ways to extend some of the research that was done with the 500 familiar faces. Just those couple areas are presenting, but I think even within that, there's just so much we can do in that arena. And I think lastly, again, kind of on the health equity side in particular, related to kind of maternity health. We're launching a maternity bundle, so I think that's also going to be an opportunity to do some analysis and evaluation of the success of that, and hopefully the reduction in some of the disparity in outcomes for women of color related to maternal and infant health.
I wanted to take a minute and see if there's other agencies, and I know the answer is yes for a couple of you, that either have or are thinking about developing their own research agendas. Almost everybody on this call has, either research, analysis, evaluation, some variation of that in their job title. So this is a good group to, start either, you're working on that or you might be thinking about that. And again, to the extent that we can find common ground across those, I think that's an opportunity for a P20 win. I can also stop screen sharing if that helps. I brought up the research agenda. We can go through sort of where things are on that. But I see Rachel has raised her hand.
I have to I have to apologize. I have to leave the meeting. I've got a text from the commissioner or something I need to deal with right now. So sorry. Have a great meeting, everybody.
Thanks, Patrick.
I can just jump in and say, this is an area I think when Susan raised it, I jumped on it right away because I think that we have sort of two competing challenges at the OEC. We sort of have a strategic plan and an action plan, but we don't have the evaluation and research really linked to that plan in a really consistent way. And then we also have sort of our pandemic and post-pandemic work that requires some real strategy around evaluation connected to it as well, both for sort of peace of mind's sake that we're getting funds to the right parties, but also for federal reporting purposes. So this is a place where I know there's just an opportunity to collaborate. And I have someone working with our agency, a pre-doctoral fellow for part-time for the academic year. And I thought this might be a really great project for her to sort of tackle sort of consistency across agencies around how they formulate their research agendas. I think to Susan's point, she says it so eloquently that it helps you focus. So you're not trying to boil the ocean in terms of the impact of what you're doing. For us at the OEC, we get the same set of questions over and over again, and we have sometimes full answers, sometimes half-baked answers, and getting the full answer requires more capacity dedicated to it. So if it was something I had, something to post publicly, I might even have research partners coming to me to want to partner and work on those questions, which will inevitably throw through this partnership because they all require linking our data to other sources. So.
There are other agencies that are either thinking about or developing or have a research agenda that I'm perhaps unaware of. I think we surveyed some of the executive branch agencies. I don't know, Jen or Maura, if there's for the independent colleges, the extent to which you sort of know where they've got agendas through particular centers or something that would line up with work here. I don't know, Linda, if the HMIS committee has an agenda similar to that.
Yeah, it's funny. We have a lot of ideas where we'd like to research. I think a lot of it for us is capacity right now. We also are in the unique position to not have a permanent CEO. So we want to see if that's going to change any direction. Prevention is always a big topic for us in terms of, how do we stop people from coming into the homeless response system, or at least slow it down. We know it's never going to be stopped completely. A lot of the same things that we heard earlier, like the health equity, a lot of the disparities that we see across the board. Again, and also how our support services are actually benefiting the people who are receiving them. So we have a lot of things. The challenge, like I said, is really right now capacity for us. So hoping that's going to be able to change in the near future.
Yeah, I don't know of anything. I mean, I'm sure individual researchers have some research agendas that we're not aware about, and we could survey them at some point. But I agree with Linda, capacity, given the pandemic, it's certainly limiting people's bandwidth quite a bit. And I don't see it getting better this year.
Jan, raise your hand up.
Hi, I was wondering if it would help to talk about, I know for the grant from USCD, it was an infrastructure grant where we were putting staffing into the agencies. And at the time, I know this has changed, but it might be helpful to just talk about how it's changed, because the initial plan had been to put, one researcher in each of the initial primary agencies and then half of a researcher in the others to add that capacity. Maybe an update on what that plan is. I can just share for CSCU, we are in the process of hiring a researcher, and I think others are maybe looking at shared positions, but maybe it would be useful to just bring the group up to speed on what the plan is, since it is a grant deliverable. Thanks.
Yeah, and we have the screen up still. Sorry, I'm looking at a different screen. So let me combine that with just sort of an update as I know it on the research agenda that we have, because really the deliverable is to kind of execute on this research agenda. The staffing plan is not a deliverable of the grant necessarily, or we've communicated to Department of Education that we're going to modify the staffing plan. So what we're doing is trying to make sure that there's resources available for each of the 5 topics in the research agenda as it stands. So 5 topics we have here: predictive model for college and career success. I think, Jan, as you mentioned, CSCU is in the process of hiring a researcher for that, to take on that, I think, as a project. We are in the midst of, we had opened a position for a research analyst at OPM that would, I think, have a lead role on the second topic, working very closely with early childhood and State Department of Education. So we're in the midst of onboarding for that now. For the financial aid programs, we'll take a moment to introduce, and then if he wants to say hi. So we have sort of a assistance for the next academic year from Ryan Scala, who's an MPP student at UConn and is going to be working again, sort of at OPM very closely with CCIC, Office of Higher Ed, state colleges, I think UConn as well, on the third part of the agenda, and sort of moving us forward on that, on the financial aid programs, so that we have a good base of understanding about what the literature says, have the right information about what data we do collect, where it sits, the extent, the ways in which it can be used, and then that we sort of build up some materials to take that kind of agenda further. So I'll pause quickly, and Ryan, if you want to say hi to everyone, I would encourage you to do so. So Ryan started this week, we had a little lead time over the summer, but he's basically starting this week. I don't know if you want to say hi to folks to talk about.
Yeah, no, hi everyone. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Ryan. So as Scott said, I'm going to be interning with OPM this academic year. I'm going into my second year of my master's in public policy program, and I graduate next May. So it should be a fun year. I'm looking forward to doing some research about financial aid programs in the state. I'm currently doing a lot of background research on kind of previous studies that have been done with financial aid, whether that's federal aid. There's been a lot of studies done on federal aid and how that affects certain outcomes with college, completion rates and grades in college. There's been a lot of research for federal aid on that, and there's been some research on state aid overall. There are some gaps, and that's what I'm looking into. And Scott and I have been talking, and I might end up kind of drafting a memo about all this information. So we'll see how that develops over the next month or two. But that's what I'm currently doing right now in my first week, and what I'm going to be doing in the subsequent weeks.
And I think you're probably going to be working closely with Office of Higher Ed, kind of as a new agency, to also get some of the materials and documentation for their work, helping them get on board. Jen and Lloyd Blanchard from UConn had sort of led the effort to develop this part of the research agenda. And I think to the question on, someone brought up a point about sort of like timeliness and the policy priorities. This is something where, like the landscape changes. And so I think to be just making sure that we're on top of the changing landscape for financial aid programs, there's I think money that's proposed through the American Rescue Plan to go to support need-based financial aid, and so making sure that we are able to sort of adapt within the research agenda to reflect changing environment. I think that's important. And I don't know if there's things that you wanted to flag that are, priorities from either the perspective, your perspective, or just sort of having been involved in the planning process, or if you want to flag.
I mean, I would just note we haven't even gotten that money. So, and school year's already started. So I don't know if we'll be able to, and Jeet's probably in the same, there's just so much ARPA money that's scheduled to go out. I think studying it is probably in the next 12 months will probably not really be reasonable, right? Because it's not going to affect outcomes, Scott, for another couple of years. But, we're excited to have additional funding when we get it. That'll be great. So yeah, I mean, I think Ryan laid out like some of the issues that we've talked about, that like there's just nobody's really even looked at the state financial aid program for some time. It's gotten received significant cuts over the last 10 years. So, we've sort of tasked Ryan to level set and see what's going on in other states, see how, think about what are some of the questions we need to ask, just within the context of the fact that like funding has really diminished quite a bit. And sort of what we're thinking about how to prioritize the limited funding that we have, and just looking to see how the cuts maybe have impacted college going, and then obviously what are the outcomes for those grant recipients themselves. So we're excited, and Ryan and others, I've been letting people know about this, and I think, Scott, the influx of funding is really good timing, and the study is really well timed to say, like, if there is additional funding down the road, like it'll be nice to have this study done to show like how financial aid's working in Connecticut right now, and whether changes need to be made in the future.
I think that's a good point on the timing of the disbursement of funds.
And we're excited to work with you, Ryan. So thanks for being here, and let us know we can help.
Yeah, thanks, Chad.
I think we've lost Patrick. I can talk about what I know on the next one, the workforce training outcomes. I think Lori Colburn from Department of Labor has also been somewhat involved in this, but they started to do some analysis of the WIO adult program, which is a large program that is, fits within the guidelines here. And so there's been some preliminary analysis for that that's kind of moving that agenda forward, looking at the framework for kind of a net impact and eventually like a return on investment framework for workforce training programs, which is something that I think other states have done. So I think some progress is being made on that already at Department of Labor, although I think Lori or Patrick could cover it in a little more detail. And then the last item on the agenda, we've really done very little on, although I think this is where I think looking to, Linda, Susan, and Trina, the new agencies that are part of P20 WIN, we've kind of held off on moving forward on this item on the research agenda until those agencies are on board. And I think to answer your question on the grant support, that also has been largely unspent until we could go through the research planning process last year, the technical upgrade process this year, and the onboarding of the new agencies. And so that once we, that gives us a base to sort of make good decisions about the use of those resources, but they are, largely undispersed at this point. I think CSU is the only agency that's made a request for the funds so far. So we have most of the grant resources still there to support analytical capacity for P20 WIN, and it's really getting over these milestones to have the new agencies as equal partners in the system to go through the planning process, for research planning process, for technical upgrades, to make sure that we know what our needs are before we spend the resources. So I think in the next year, we do need to sort of hit the ground running on these, and I think that's where starting to think about the research agenda topics where we have gaps in capacity, that we can target the resources where they're most needed. I think that's the approach we're planning to take. Oh, there's a hand up, sorry. Dan, did you have a hand up?
Yeah, that was me. I'm just sort of waffling a little bit. I know that the grant was an infrastructure grant, and I know that there's a spin to say, okay, the focus is really on completing the research, but I just want to bring us back to the core that and maybe decisions, well, the core of the original proposal had been to expand the capacity of the agencies to handle not just this research, but research and general participation in P20 when being able to develop the data sets that are necessary for research questions as they come along, not just these, but also additional. It was a capacity building, it was an infrastructure project. And so if decisions are being made to shift that goal, to shift the way we're talking about it, I just think it's really important that there be maybe some discussion, acknowledgement, and maybe this group is out of it. Maybe it's between OPM and 8 and SDE as the primary owners of that grant. But it's something that sticks with me because I think that capacity issue keeps coming up, and I think it's more than just addressing these questions. I think it's sustainable capacity for all the participating agencies. So I appreciate you allowing me to say that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for raising it. I don't know, Ajit, I think we're hopefully in like pretty regular communication with Federal Department of Education about the priorities. I don't know if there's anything you want to raise about your understanding of the change in direction.
No, I think you've been doing a fantastic job of keeping the feds up to date every step of the way. So I think they know exactly what's going on with our grant. So I don't feel like they should be surprised by anything we do, because you've been keeping them abreast every meeting and sending them the written updates that they need.
Okay, but I hear, Jan, from you that I think that some of that you may want some of the same updates there. So we could set up a separate time for that, or figure out the right form. We should do that.
Okay, I'm not looking for updates. I think just more an engagement from those who are involved in the grant around shift in priorities. And maybe it's not. I know there's a lot of talk about shared resources. I just feel like it's something that folks should be aware of. If we're going to be having a role at OPM that's for here, this and this, that it might be useful for people to know. Or if an agency can request, like we've requested that we get an agreement to actually hire a person at CSU. If others can do that, there were 2 positions for DOL. So I don't need a personal discussion. I certainly don't want monthly updates. And I just, that's all. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think you're not missing anything. So when OPM posted the position, we shared it with everybody here. Ajit and Rachel are involved in the planning process for developing the position and so on. We spoke with Department of Labor about staffing yesterday. So I don't think you're missing any information on it. Anything else on the research topics? Again, so the reason for bringing this up now was to prepare for the November board meeting, the executive board meeting. Hopefully we can engage the executive board in sort of discussion about the research engine, make sure it reflects their priorities, iron out questions about timing, the scope, the resources, make sure that we know kind of who's doing what. And I think the way Susan framed it earlier, it is both a way of reflecting the policy priorities and helping to sort of calibrate the inflow of requests. And so that we can, it does say for the documentation that, we're going to prioritize requests that align with the research agenda. And so this is a good way of both encouraging requests that support this agenda and being able to help prioritize if we start to get an increased volume of requests. Nothing. I will go quickly through the data sharing agreements. So we promised to send these last week and have failed in that largely through my own missteps, but very soon, possibly today, maybe more likely Monday or Tuesday of next week, we will send a draft data sharing agreement out to the members of this group, and to the extent that you brought them into the process, the legal counsel. If you don't want it sent to your legal counsel yet, just say so, and I will not do that. The draft is very similar, I think, to what you had seen in May. We just took a little time to line it up with the revisions that were made to the enterprise agreements, and I think that's where it won't be unfamiliar, but we just had to go back and make sure as many T's were crossed and I's were dotted as possible. The plan for the data sharing agreements is to have a baseline template, so one single baseline template for all the data sharing agreements, and then variations that include specific language for some of the different legal and regulatory frameworks. And the first round we're planning to do probably, maybe not all at once, but on close and the heels, is for education law, so FERPA, education laws, with, I think, some variations for CCIC because of the special sort of considerations you have working with the independent colleges, CSU for some of the questions that come up in the enterprise agreements. So we'll have like essentially a baseline template, a FERPA template that is additional, adds language to the baseline template, a health template for the HIPAA covered data, which is not all health data, with additional language that, one for wage and unemployment data, the UI data for labor, and have sort of baseline templates for those. And then as we mix and match data in requests, we'll be able to draw the language from those individual templates. And then we plan to add on additional frameworks and have templates for those for based on a kind of a think of the initial understanding of what the agencies have, where we're likely to see requests and where the priorities are, again, sort of in the research center, probably for SNAP, TANF, child support data, and then FAFSA, the financial aid applications. Medicaid we covered through HIPAA, which is, I think, one of the major data sets that Susan was alluding to from DSS. So those should be very soon. I apologize for taking longer to get these through than anticipated. And then after that, either I or Katie, depending on the timing, will sort of set up the same kind of group set. If people want group sessions, we'll set up the same kind of group sessions. If you want to do sort of one-on-one feedback or discussion, then we will happily accommodate that. Some of these, you know, if you're in an education agency, but you want to hear about the way, you know, Medicaid data is treated, then you're sort of welcome to join that. But we're going to probably set these up so there's some subject matter focus. Let's see if we're getting questions. Anything folks have questions on data sharing agreements? Yet hands raised? No. Okay. Great. Again, I apologize for taking a little while to get these out, but they're forthcoming. The Yale request that we talked about earlier is really the first one that's going to use this new baseline template. So I think in that case, the 3 agencies involved have reviewed it and feel comfortable, and they have, you know, some further modifications, but that should work for at least that request. Last but not least, we have the technical upgrade recommendations to discuss. In the so we had the technical upgrade recommendations. The planning group had met for about 6 months or so, and we drafted a set of recommendations based on that process. Presented those to the data stewards a couple of times, to the data governing board, and circulated that with the members of this group, offline for revisions, edits, circulated with the members of the planning group, offline for revisions, edits, circulated with our SST consultant, with a consultant from ASP to get sort of suggestions, recommendations on the recommendations. And then at the executive board meeting last week, presented these 5 recommendations. As Jen indicated, not surprisingly, the last recommendation on exploring options to reduce the movement of data to increase security, improve data request management generated sort of the most discussion. I want to emphasize that this really says explore here, and so that is what we intend to do. I thought this would be a good time to talk through the next steps on it, and to introduce the newest member of the Data Governing Board, because one of the recommendations was to formalize a role for DAS Best, which is the state's IT agency on the Data Governing Board, because the system as a whole is so reliant on technology, understanding the latest, the changes that are occurring, within individual agencies, making sure that we've got a good line of communication to somebody who understands that world, and rather than sort of going on a case-by-case basis, that we sort of formalize that role. We had our state CIO, 2 of his directors actively involved in the planning process, and they were, wonderful and engage participants at every step of the way. And so we wanted to find a way to keep that going. And gratefully, Mark Raymond, our state CIO, has asked Bob Berry to join us. And Bob, if you want to introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about who you are and what you do to this group, that would be great. I know we did the introductions at the beginning for everybody else, and we lost a couple of people. But yeah, if you just want to say who you are and welcome you to the group. Thank you.
Okay. Bob Berry, I've been at the state now for a little over 2 years. I lead the data services group, which we support databases across the state and several different technologies. So I have a very long database background back from the 80s. So I've been around for a while. I was a database architect and administrator for 20 years before I moved into management for the last 20 years. So I do have a lot of information, and I think there's things that we're doing now within the organization, you know, as we're bringing things together that will help streamline and bring services to the group.
Based on your early assessment, do you have anything that you want to, I don't know if you've had any questions or things you want to bring up for the group, or questions that folks have for Bob?
Well, I'm still learning. Scott, thankfully, gave me a little rundown yesterday. I kind of went through the technical upgrade recommendations and stuff like that, there are a few things that I think we can, you know, address together. I have a lot of contacts within it. There was one I noticed developing an incident response plan and stuff. We probably want to bring in Jeff Brown, our Chief Information Security Officer, in on that, because they have incident responses there. So instead of reinventing the wheel, we might be able to bring that in. But I'm still kind of learning. So I feel like I joined in a well-running orchestra, and I'm playing the flutophone. So still learning here. Any questions for me?
I think the example for the incident response plan is like a perfect example of where I think it's no disrespect to anybody in this group that most of us, or certainly I, have never drafted an incident response plan. I think probably most of us have that in common, but we need one. And so being able to have a direct link to you know, people who've already done this with expertise in it, I think is you know, important and worthwhile. So like that's a specific kind of concrete. If we can find a way to coordinate with Jeff on something so we don't reinvent the wheel, I think that would be very helpful.
I'm really glad that we have a direct connection to our statewide technology enterprise now. I think that that's a piece of the puzzle that's, you know, Ajit and I sit in some statewide IT managers meetings. Scott, you've attended those as well. I think that as the state is really thinking about how to improve technology, it's going to improve the way that we collect data and the way that we share it. So I'm really glad to have that connection. So welcome.
Great, thank you.
All right, and I'm going to thank Bob particularly because he got this on fairly short notice. So we managed to get him assigned to this, get some initial discussion. And so I think, you know, hopefully, again, this is a good way to build up a sustainable, you know, continued line of communication. So it's not an ad hoc, case-by-case basis. So be not the last engagement. I did want to, we have I think the slide up with the next steps on the technical upgrade recommendation. I want to go through those. We have accomplished the first recommendation. You know, the board voted to add the DSPS representative. Developing an incident response plan, I think, is kind of, we put as a shared responsibility with OPM, Department of Labor, as given the sort of roles operating in with the data integration. Our hope was to have that by the end of the calendar year, And Bob, to your point, I think being able to set up a way to discuss this with Jeff Brown would be great, again, just so that we can leverage something that's already there to the extent possible. The two middle recommendations, I think are also kind of shared responsibilities for OPM and Department of Labor to look at streamlining the data request process, and then making sure the tools that we use for data transfer, the essentially SFTP tools, provide all the kind of audit and notification options that we need. We will definitely probably need and at least benefit from help from DS Best on these two topics. I didn't put a timeline. If there's suggestions on sort of the urgency for these, please let me know. But I think this is where OPM and Patrick and the team at DOL are going to have to work close in hand to look at the landscape for some of these tools to just make sure that we got, if there's anything that we can make improvements on, that we're going and looking at the current landscape. And last but not least, so the option to look at the kind of reducing the movement of data, we have here to explore this, and I kind of, again, mean what it says, that what we had benefited from is voluntary participation from a lot of agencies in the planning process to get from the beginning of the year through July. And what I'm hopeful for is that we can get some continued voluntary participation from agencies, either from the members of this group or from your colleagues or staff with interest in this, to set up informational calls. I think mostly with other jurisdictions, other state SLDSs in some cases, maybe like a county or a municipal system that's got a similar setup, who are navigating the same kind of landscape of either trying to work within the federated model in a more efficient way, or looking at the transition from federated to hybrid models. Set up, again, just informational calls to hear how they've done it, what the questions are. I think the higher ed sort of raised good questions on like what data would be potentially a focus for centralization. So this is a good way to talk to other states that have done this, and the benefits or trade-offs that come with those kinds of transitions. If you, and I think we'll probably in a few cases need to talk to vendors or solution providers, although we're not in a procurement mode, but we can have sort of informational conversations with them. So if there are, I'll send an email out to this group, sort of a list of some of the examples. We had a good, just sort of a fly on the wall conversation with two other states, where one of them is in a hybrid model for their SLDS, and one is looking at the transition. So I think that was a good way to just hear two other states grappling with the same questions and the trade-offs involved. So I'll send out to this group, to the members of the planning group, kind of asking for anyone that is interested to be on a set of those calls, and then we'll just set up a handful, probably I think 5 or 6 different calls with different jurisdictions, learn more about what they've done, and then use that to sort of identify where there's a promising path or something that we want to dig into further. So if anyone is interested in that and you know that now, let me know. If otherwise, I'll send an email out and just get people to volunteer for that. Again, we're benefiting from people's voluntary participation in the meetings to date, and I think probably need to rely on continuing that a little bit into the future. Any suggestions for either the timeline for the data request tools, data transmittal applications, or interest in the involuntary series of calls about looking at options to sort of reduce the movement of data?
I can provide a list of what we currently have in-house for ETL, data transformation tools on there, but I don't know enough about what's going on here to really do. I know you have some of your own, so.
Yeah, this is like, again, I think a perfect example. It would be really helpful, I think, Bob, to have that, and we could go through just sort of like a quick side discussion about what we're using and where we have hit. I don't know if we've hit challenges, but we just need to make sure that the capacity of the tools is up to the task at hand. And I know, what the state is using, changes constantly. not constantly, but changes occasionally, and so we'll make sure we're up with the latest and greatest.
And what's the best way to disseminate that information? Should I send it to you, Scott, and then you determine who to get it, or?
Yeah, I think that's kind of up to you. There's not a great answer to that. So it's either myself or Katie Breslin, who's out today, is sort of the best way to reach the full group. You have full reign to kind of reach out to everybody that's on the data governing board. But if you want to intermediate anything through us, we're more than happy to do that.
Okay. Great. Thanks. And vice versa, people are free to reach out to me as well, please.
All right. So we will kind of, dig into these. I think the work for most of the recommendations falls on OPM and DOL to pursue. And then the voluntary participation and exploring those further options, I think, would be helpful for those that are willing to give it. And I'll send something out with that. Actually, Bob, if you have something you want to send it, then maybe we can bundle those together as like a next steps.
Sure. Oh, yeah.
Other than that, that is it for this meeting. So we will, I think, have some follow-up with the individual agencies. We're going to be developing some more materials for the research agenda. I think just sort of like one-pagers or things to cover the topics in a little more detail. So it's more in-depth than what's on the website now, but not so much detail that it's numbing. But we could get the word out to people about what the priorities are for P20 Win and where they currently stand. We'll send the data sharing agreements out probably very early next week, unless something changes in the next few hours. And then I'll send something out again, possibly today, possibly Monday, on the technical upgrade recommendations and just the next steps on that. So thank you, everyone, for the patience and your willingness to participate. And we'll post the slides and the notes and everything pretty soon after the meeting. Anything else before I close this out?
Sure, thank you.
I wish for a good weekend. Yes, thank you. All right, everyone. Yeah, have a great weekend. Thank you, Jan. And we will talk to everybody soon. If there's something anyone wants to follow up on, just let me know.
Sure. All right.
Getting things out a little late this week.
Thanks.
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 Bye.